Working on our T100 carburetor today. We're still waiting on some parts for the motor to come in, so we figured we'd go through this and check it out. We went ahead and pulled it apart. It was pretty dirty, so we put it in our carb tank. We let that sit overnight, pulled it out, used compressed air, blew all the passages out, all the jets. We had this little funky kind of seal here, doesn't look original, on our needle jet holder, so we found a new O-ring that would work on that. So I'm sure that wasn't running right. So we're going to go through a quick assembly on the carb here, run down our parts. We have our main jet holder, which in this carburetor, which isn't too common, actually fits in the float bowl. We have our slide needle. We have our needle jet or emulsion tube, or in this case it's actually a primary choke tube. We have our needle jet holder. We have our main jet. We have our float. We have our float pin. We have our float needle. We have our emulsion, our primary choke tube washer. We have our primary jet. We have our slide. We have our enrichment circuit or starter system, plunger or valve, our cap. We're going to go ahead and assemble this. First thing we'll do, we'll put our secondary jet or our main jet in its holder, tighten that up. We have running a 170 main jet in this. I measured this. It's actually a 24 millimeter carb. It's a VM type carb. It's a Mikuni. 24 millimeters. I don't know what this came off of. I don't think this was ever original on any Triumph, or although I could be wrong, I'm not a big Triumph expert. So I don't know where this came from. Our actual, we have a single carb intake on this motor. I believe the R motors came with the dual carb setup. I'm not 100% sure on that. But we have the single carb intake manifold, which actually has a 30 millimeter hole in it. So this is going to be like our restrictor plate carburetor. So we got our main jet in our main jet holder. We're going to install that in our float bowl. That up. We're going to install our primary choke tube next. It has a little machine slot in it here. Lines up with this little pin in the carburetor body. So we're going to carefully use a pair of our long needle nose pliers to get that started. You don't want to ding this top up with your pliers, so if you use pliers to do this, be very careful. Get that started. Push it in by hand. We'll see if our slot lines up. We have to turn it slightly. We're going to use this drift to gently tap it in. That lined up. Got our choke tube washer, our choke tube or needle jet holder. On most carbs this would be the main jet, but due to the setup of this carb where we have our main jet or our secondary jet in our float bowl, this O-ring is actually going to seat down in here in this counter bore, so all our fuel will have to go through here, down into our secondary jet holder, then through our secondary jet or main jet, and then that'll come up into our choke tube and then be metered by our slide needle into the motor. I'm going to install our primary jet or our idle circuit jet. got to be careful when you're putting these in. These are brass jets and a little cast alloy body. I've been doing these for about 25 years, so I got a pretty good feel for it. You definitely don't want to over torque those. Alright, we got our needle jet, or I should say our float valve. We're going to put our float valve needle in here, and we're going to install our float. Put our float pin in. And we're going to put our gasket on. I'm going to reuse the old gasket. I couldn't find a parts breakdown on this carb. Went online, looked a bunch of places. I don't know where this carb came from. I know it's a Makuni. So luckily we can reuse that. Screws in. Always get all your screws started before you tighten any of them down. Okay, we're going to install our idle air screw, or our primary air screw. Adjust our mixture on our idle circuit by adjusting how much air we let in to mix with the fuel from the idle air jet or our primary jet. So we're going to set this about 1.5 turns at the beginning, and once we get the motor running and warmed up, we'll perform an idle drop procedure to set our idle mixture. We're going to install our idle speed screw, which actually adjusts the height, how far down the slide comes, which is actually how you adjust your idle speed on this. Screw this in by hand, just an arbitrary amount. Okay, we're going to install our enrichment circuit plunger, or also called our starter circuit plunger. These are a little bit tricky sometimes. We use a thin line 12mm on this. Alright, that's working nice. Install our needle in our slide. Install our needle holder plate. This will have to come back out when we put our cable on. Right now we'll go ahead and put it in there. See if we can do that without launching this spring into the stratosphere. Alright, in there. Put our cap on. In here and move our slide, make sure it slides easily.